What is up, everybody? And happy Independence Day. If you're listening to this on the launch day of this podcast, it is Independence Day, and you are hopefully enjoying your independence because that's a pretty big deal. And to celebrate, or I guess in honor of that, we're going to talk about a firearm pretty darn instrumental in our independence, and that's the 1766 Charleville. We've got a reproduction, on the table here, Ryan.
Correct, from our friends at Pedersoli.
Pedersoli.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really cool firearm. Obviously, lots of history. And a lot going on. It's really, really cool.
It's a neat gun.
Let's talk about this thing. It's a smoothbore flintlock.
It is.
What else?
Well, as Mark mentioned, smoothbore. There's no rifling in there, right? So rifle barrels existed at the time, but they were extremely costly and laborious to produce, and it was not really in vogue at that period of time. We understood what rifling gave us, but we didn't really utilize it because you might also use this for shooting ducks.
Oh, geese. Yeah. I imagine you could put a load of shot down in there and off you go.
Absolutely. In
my limited readings, one thing that was mentioned was, due to the tactics or the methods of war, the increased, distance and accuracy that a rifled barrel might give a person became somewhat moot when you're on a battlefield and it's filled with smoke and you can't see anyway.
That and it, at that time, just looking at rifling practices, actually probably would have complicated the loading under duress in short amounts of time.
That's the other thing it said is that a rifled barrel was more difficult to load than the smoothbore.
So you really just wanted to get rocks in the sky.
Correct.
Yep. When you're all lined up like that.
And quite honestly, could have been rocks. So lead was a pretty well-defined commodity at that point in time. We used it for projectiles and as well as other things in manufacturing at this point in time as a species. So it was in limited supply. So we remember the movie The Patriot, starring Mel Gibson, where he was melting down the lead soldiers.
Mm-hmm. Remember we could have toys made of lead. Nobody cared.
Yeah, it was fun.
Great time.
Yeah. Mark also mentioned it is a flintlock. So it's not the original firearm, which would have been probably ignited by a burning ember of some kind or a rope, what we would maybe call a matchlock or something like that. But this is a flintlock. So there's a piece of flint or chert or agate that's on the hammer here that then strikes the frizzen. Ow, that hurt my finger. We would have had a finer powder potentially in that pan, and the flint hits that frizzen, creates a spark, lights that priming powder, which shoots a flame through this tiny hole in the side of the barrel here, which is called the flash hole.
I was going to say, that's the flash hole,
yeah. And which then ignites our mainline charge and pushes our ball down the barrel.
Pretty simple.
It is.
Well,
it's
kind of,
simple,
but also like whoever came up with it.
A lot of
had
thought.
to do some thinking.
Pretty ingenious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
black powder rifle.
Black powder rifle, yep. This was long before the advent of smokeless powders or similar powders to smokelesses. What I love about these guns is that they have their inner workings on the outside. So when we think about modern firearms, we have our firing pin spring contained within something like a bolt or a bolt carrier group or some other mechanism of the rifle, right? So like if you think about an AR-15, its firing pin is contained and floats within this bolt. Its sear and hammer mechanisms are contained within the lower receiver. None of that is exposed to the outside world. And all of that happens very linearly. And then this lock, as it's called, this mechanism on the side here, is all on the external part of the rifle. Its spring, the lock spring here is visible. All the guts are very similar in function to what a modern firearm is. It's just they're on the outside.
Right.
So we're not igniting anything in line with the bore. It's on the side, and that had its own set of challenges and complications. But it's really cool to look at this and be like, well, it's a gun, right? it's a rifle. It bears most the same semblance of what we have today.
Sure.
It's just its operating mechanisms are external as opposed to internal for the majority.
I can't imagine what this would have been like to use in some sort of austere environment, or even just inclement weather.
Tough.
Or even just not standing in a line with the, like, you talk about, okay, I see that somehow this thingamajig that you flipped over here, what was it called again?
This is called your frizzen.
The frizzen?
The frizzen.
Okay, so that is at least protecting the powder charge that you have in there somewhat.
To a degree.
Not to a hermetically sealed environment or anything like that.
Right.
But it's at least protecting it and keeping it in there. Because I was wondering, if you didn't have that, I mean, all you have to do is tilt the thing, your powder charge is going to basically pour right out.
Exactly correct. Rain, snow, dew, mist, fog, whatever, could contaminate that priming powder in there and goof the whole thing up. So you would read of or see depictions of covers that either soldiers or hunters or whoever was using this gun may have put over the top of the lock mechanism to keep some of those elements out. And of course, if you had a piece of buckskin or leather of some kind over the top of it, that afforded you a tremendous amount more protection than even just the frizzen would over the pan. And yeah, but it's a very real thing. So, your primer was a rock.
Yeah.
And so, like this one is held in place by a strap of lead that was common, also was leather, right?
Sure.
So, this thing has a finite number of times that it can strike that frizzen before it gets dull, and then it needs to be redressed so that it creates spark. And then, of course, it can just fracture and shatter.
Right.
In which you need to find yourself another source of flint, which you would likely have kept on. You know what I should have brought? I should have brought my possibles bag.
Oh, sure.
Golly, what a fool I am.
Well, I would imagine a person might carry some extra flints with them.
Absolutely you would. Yep. Or the ability to nap flint.
Okay, sure.
To know how to do that. So I think I get so excited about this now that I'm talking about it out loud. When we look back in prehistoric times, and we would see tribes across the world napping stone to make tools, whether it was knives or scrapers or in projectile points, spear points, etc. We weren't that far removed in 1776, even though we had something that propelled a metallic projectile downrange at a high rate of speed. We were still napping
flint to make our guns go off.
Correct. What a wild deal. And then this carried on. I mean, they were still using flintlocks into the Civil War, which was, mid part of the 1800s. But it's such an interesting thing. What an awesome combination of prehistoric technology and what was a quantum leap then with, at the time, modern technology, which was a quantum leap, and the two fused and blended at that point.
I mean, yeah, we've harnessed the power of this rock and we have injected it into our mechanical device.
Yeah. That's like some science fiction thing. Like they've got some sort of crystal that they got to put in to make the ship go. Yeah,
exactly.
It all comes back to a rock. All right?
Well, yeah, or Jedis and their lightsabers and everything. It's the crystals.
I mean, even think about just maybe you mentioned this. I was thinking about my next question, so maybe I missed this, but just starting fire in general.
Yeah,
pretty big deal.
Yep.
Right. Boy, good old Flint.
Yeah. Napoleon Dynamite's time machine with the crystals.
Yep.
Hold on, I have to put in the crystals.
Ugh, piece of crap. Turn it off. Turn it off, Kip.
So did better systems exist at the time, or were they just too difficult to manufacture, and so this was just what they had to do to outfit an army of rebel fighters, or what?
So I think yes, better systems did exist, and I think, but not on a mass scale.
Right.
Like you would have had gun makers from Germany or other European countries that had then ended up in the New World that were exceptional at their craft. And they would make these one-of-ones that were just beautifully well fit, well finished, and to a higher degree of accuracy. And this is where we saw rifling happen. Although I'd have to talk to like a black powder historian to figure out the prevalence of rifle bores in the New World at that time. I'm certain they probably existed, although probably not at a high level. You also saw a reduction in caliber. So we saw a lot of 40 and 30 caliber offerings in those rifles. Here again, lead was a commodity, and one not easily come by, I suppose. And so if you were a long rifleman and you were using your rifle for defense and hunting, it may be advantageous to have a smaller bore so that instead of getting one projectile, you get two.
Sure.
Right.
And you put your precedence on accuracy.
Speaking of projectile, I think this is a 69
Yeah.
caliber.
Yeah. And bore diameters were kind of subjective at that point.
Sure.
68, 69, pretty loose fit. So we
Mhm.
used a cloth or paper patch to wad that up and try to get some seal inside of that bore. 69, 68-ish.
Yeah, I was watching a video, and a guy was loading this. He actually did it a few different ways. He had some paper cartridges.
Yep.
Which I thought it was really interesting to watch. I mean, he'd bite the top of the paper off.
Yep.
He'd pour a little bit of the powder in the pan, close the frizzen, then pour the rest of the powder down the barrel, and then just kind of scrunch the whole thing up, which I believe it contained the bullet as well.
Correct.
And that was kind of, I guess, that paper of the paper cartridge became like the wadding or the patch, if you will. And then off it went. But then he also took this same gun. He was using this gun.
Charleville, yeah.
Yeah, and he used a piece of buckskin.
Yep.
As a patch. And then what he said with that one, though, and I guess here's where I'm going with the 69 caliber. He actually used a much smaller ball with the buckskin.
Yep.
Because I think it was
It's probably thicker.
it's thicker. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a little more substance to it.
Yep.
And then he also used a material called tow so he what did he do? He poured powder and then this tow, which is it's in my computer. It's made of some plant, and that was essentially like the wadding. Put the bullet on top of that, and then took another piece of that wadding and put it on top of the bullet to kind of hold it in place, and then shot. It was interesting to see kind of the I guess the versatility and also the it wasn't picky.
Sure.
You know,
Large bore diameter allows you to get away with that. You know, another popular wadding material is wasp nest.
oh, interesting.
Yeah.
It's paper.
So correct. And so you think about like the resourcefulness of a people when like this was the most modern thing that we had manufactured, aside from like a seafaring vessel perhaps. And there was some optics at that point, albeit crude. To go out and be like, okay, what am I doing today? I got a farm. I have to hunt. Oh, gosh, there's some wasp nests. I'm going to smoke out that nest. That is going to be a super useful thing for me later on while I'm hunting or in combat.
Just make use of everything.
Yeah,
that's
you're
wadding material.
Use of it. You're not just throwing rocks at it for fun.
Right, correct. Yeah, don't do that, though. But yeah, this was one of a couple arms that was, I guess that's how we got on this conversation, that was popularized during the War of our Independence.
War of Independence.
Yes.
Yep.
So where was the Charleville originated? It sounds French.
It's a gift from the French, in fact.
Is it?
We used brown besses. That was a pretty common arm.
Mhm.
Charleville was an extraordinarily prolific arm. Some fun, spooky history about how a whole bunch of these showed up on our shores when we couldn't get anything into the New World. Maybe a document was signed in a different format. Maybe this was destined to go somewhere else, but actually went west and ended up on the East Coast, the west side of the East Coast. And
they're going west.
What a surprise!
But it's actually east.
Through a whoopsie on a document, all of a sudden a whole shipload of these things showed up and armed a bunch of our early countrymen. So a gift from the French, and thank you. That we ended up with the Charleville in hand to fight that war.
Are we thanking the French in some ways?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For our independence?
Absolutely, yes. And
Can't believe it.
Remarkably effective arm.
Accuracy-wise, I was reading on a man-sized target about 40 to 50 yards. Like I'd say like reliable, like which is just like, you think of like the things we are capable of today. Like I can't imagine being at like, 60 yards and being like, bang, and they're like,
Or seeing something at 80 and being like, I'm just not. I gotta get closer.
Save my ammo.
Yeah.
I mean, it was better than a bow, right?
Yeah.
By a margin.
I mean, yeah, they didn't exactly have compound PRS bows back then, so.
Not that that's not necessarily. Geez,
Nope,
not necessarily
Look,
related.
this
This
thing's a
thing
pole
is
vaulting
long.
stick.
I never read of archery equipment being used by American troops in that war, but I would almost have to imagine that.
How would it have not happened at least sometimes? I mean, Mel Gibson used a couple axes.
Yeah, I'm certain that some of our native allies during that utilized their archery equipment, which they were extremely proficient with. But I have to wonder, did anybody who was out there at that time, a colonist fighting for his or her independence, picked up a longbow and engaged?
If you could comment on this podcast.
Yeah. Comment below.
Tell us.
You can affix a bayonet to it.
Sure.
We don't have one here, but sounds like that was actually a pretty important accessory and was used like commonly.
Oh yeah, I mean, you fire your round. It takes you. It's not like reloading a single shot shotgun where you just flick it open, the shell kicks out, you drop a new one in, you snap it shut, cock the hammer, and go. I mean, it's a process to load them. These shooters were extremely competent in doing so because their lives certainly depended on it. But when you're fighting in columns that are marching towards each other, and that distance of engagement is 60 yards, you fire that weapon, 60 yards can be covered pretty quickly by the opposing force. You ought to have the bayonet on there for when all of a sudden you don't have time to stuff another
little known grade at CQB.
Right. Correct.
A CQB firearm.
Yeah, it sounded like, obviously a variety of circumstances where the bayonet might be used, but also in so I personally don't view it I don't think of the bayonet as I'm going on offense, but it sounds like if you had somebody on their heels a little bit,
yep,
that's what they'd be like. We're going
fix bayonets.
We're rush them.
Yep.
Can I point out that when I first picked this thing up, I was expecting it to weigh more than, say, an M1 Garand or some other sort of World War II era battle rifle with a wood stock and all that. It's not very heavy for how tremendously long it is. And I have to assume that's because really all it is, it's a very long barrel, but it's quite svelte in the wood furniture here. And then the action itself is fairly simple. It doesn't have a big beefy bolt and all this reciprocating mass and springs and guide rods. It's a barrel with some stuff attached. So
the barrel looks huge, and it is. I mean, it's not quite 3/4 of an inch diameter on the inside, but it's large, 0.7 nominally diameter on the bore, but it's thin walled. So it looks it looks much bigger than it actually is. So if this was a rifled barrel from modern era, it'd probably have a 22, a 6, a 6.5 millimeter bore, and it would weigh a ton more than it does now.
Okay.
I used to have a customer at the shop I worked at that had a Brown Bess from the period, like a real one, and he actively shot that firearm. And he handed it to me, and he goes, "You know what this is?" And I said, "No." And he goes, "Well, this is a Brown Bess." He's like, "This gun probably very likely fought battles in the Revolutionary War."
Very
and
cool.
I was like, "Holy smokes." And I looked at it and I was amazed at how paper thin the barrel was.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Is this just due to corrosion?" He's like, "No, it's not really corroded. It's patinaed and it's been, browned correctly. That's just how they were." And the barrel was roundish, but it wasn't a perfectly concentric bore.
Yeah.
And he shot it. He was a reenactor. He was an enthusiast.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he shot it actively. I never asked him if he hunted with it, and I should have. He's since passed, but remarkable firearm.
When you were talking about the accuracy before, Ryan, and you were kind of talking about fighting in columns, which is I guess one of the preferred tactics of the time, and it sounds like to me like that style, it kind of made up for the accuracy, because you're firing these controlled volleys of fire, just almost like a wall of lead, coming at you, and you might not hit the guy you're aiming at, but you might hit the guy next to him.
They did really sort of help each other out in the the whole accuracy standpoint.
Yeah,
it was like, hey, we'll stand this way to make it.
I'm glad we got away from it.
I'm glad we did too. Aiming these things.
You know what? Like, I think, honestly, even back then, I probably would have asked some questions. And you know me, Jim, I don't like conflict. But, like, are we sure this is the best idea?
I mean,
I don't know. It just doesn't seem like who came up with this? Like,
Right. Aiming these things, speaking of accuracy, there is a little blade sight on the end. But there's this other thing. Mark asked this question prior to the podcast, and I said, nope. We got to ask it on the podcast.
Well, I didn't think it was, but then
this
I'm
thing
like,
at the rear
huh?
could. I mean, it's like cockeyed, so it wouldn't even. But it looks like a rear peep sight.
It does. It's not.
It's on the hammer.
Yeah, it's not that. So this.
I mean, I couldn't even conceive of a way that it would work because it's not even in line with the. I was like,
no.
So you have slung across your body a possibles bag. And within that bag, you would find a couple things, a bunch of balls, a few spare flints, patching or wadding material of some kind, maybe a small knife for cutting patches out of cloth, and then a variety of tools and picks, things like this. One of these tools might have been, and I wasn't there, so I don't know. I'm sure that they did a lot more multitasking than I'm leading on to. But one of these things would be a flash hole pick that if your flash hole had been plugged by, say, tallow or beeswax mixed with powder or just powder residue itself, you'd stab it in that flash hole and you'd pick it out. And on the other end of that, it looked like a large iron nail. You needed to change your flint, put it in there, break that rascal loose.
Use it like a wrench.
Yep. Take that out, pull your flint out. That was shattered or broken or tipped wrong. Retain it because that's a useful thing. It's like taking your mag out and putting it in your mag pouch, and put a fresh flint in, tension that rascal back up.
Toss me a flint.
Yeah, right?
Changing flint. That would be Call of Duty Revolutionary War ops.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that possibles bag was the equivalent of the chest rack and the battle belt today, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's pretty high. It was pretty high speed that it had that, actually.
Oh, yeah.
You looked at that and you were like, whoa, brother.
So, yeah, I really goofed up. I should have brought that possibles bag.
We can bring it in. Maybe we'll run through it or something.
I should have brought, it would be technically period correct. And then I definitely have a period correct powder horn. That powder horn was made in the 1700s.
Cool.
It's funny with funny, not funny. Maybe everybody does this. I don't know. But like my modern muzzleloading kit that I bring with me, I still call my possibles bag. Do you call it that?
No.
No, I do. I'm like,
you know what, Mark? Keep it alive.
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
How's the trigger on this thing, Ryan?
Well, Jim, I guess we could find out. The problem is if
I'm not opposed.
We pull this back, it's going to strike that frizzen. There's going to be some sparkage.
I mean, let's do it.
Have at it.
You want me to do it?
Yeah, I do.
It's a flat trigger. It's very modern.
Desk pop. Ooh.
There she goes.
Yeah.
I was kind of concerned about the whole fire part to really pay attention to the trigger, but I now sort of replaying it in my head. The trigger isn't too. It's not too bad. A bit mushy.
Sure.
But not bad. Not heavy. I was expecting heavier.
Yeah, probably not terrible. And
No.
and it's funny when you look at the design of how that sear and that lock mechanism work together. It's not dissimilar to a trigger today.
A bit glocky.
Sure. Yeah.
You know,
wrong
like
with that?
there's some
The
stuff
original-
going on. Yeah,
the original.
The original.
But you saw the spark there. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, it wasn't like you're plasma cutting and a piece of slag hits the ground and explodes. It's not a whole hell of a lot going on there.
No, you kind of really hope that those sparks actually make it to the stuff.
And then you look at the frizzen and you look at the contact on the frizzen and you can see that it's somewhat even, but not exactly. And so the really good guys would harden their frizzens, have their frizzens shaped in a certain way, and nap their flints and get flint steel to ensure that they had really good flint contact.
These guys were
really good spark.
these guys basically they went on. They probably survived. They had children who had children who had children who all grew up to be the reloading community today.
Yeah.
There you go. It when I was watching that video online, I was and again, this is like a modern version, so maybe it's faster, more reliable. I don't know. I mean, I was surprised to see how fast it went boom though. Like there wasn't like some huge lock time delay. Like it was a whop, boom.
Yeah. I mean, it's there. So when
it's there, but it wasn't. You weren't waiting for it necessarily. Like you should watch this video.
I'll tell you, I fired a flintlock, which I call flinchlocks, exactly twice in my life. One went down, one went up. Neither went the direction I wanted them to go. I was not ready. Yeah.
I was impressed with how fast it took.
And that would vary too with the quality of the flint, the hardness of the frizzen, shape of the frizzen.
And I'm sure there were times where it didn't go off. Like you
certainly
pulled the trigger and
certainly.
Oh, maybe try that again.
Yep, certainly. And then that powder that you talked about, the gentleman who was pulling it from the, that paper cartridge.
Mm-hmm.
Gunpowder, like black powder these days, you buy it in a variety of grades.
Yeah.
So you'd get like null B or priming powder for your pan. 1F, 1.5F, 2F, 3F, 4F for, the actual powder charge. A gun like this, probably 1.5 or 2F would be appropriate. But then you would use a finer granulation of powder like that null B or priming powder to ensure that you had an explosive, detonation at that touch-off point. That might not have been the case because black powder production at that point in time was an extraordinarily crude process.
Right.
And I don't know that powder manufacturers of the 1700s were necessarily sifting powder, and they weren't able to control, powder production to the degree that we can today. And black powder today is an amazing propellant for what it is. It's black powder. It's still very crude.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's made out of, charcoal and saltpeter and a couple other little things in there. And
charcoal, saltpeter, and what's the sulfur?
Yep. And so
primarily, right?
Yep. And so you think about that combination. It's like, well, it's kind of a home chemist thing.
Which it is. Like, I mean, it's not equal parts. You got to get it. I was reading about black powder a little bit as well, and just kind of like the evolution of black powder and perfecting the recipe, and how for many years it wasn't knowing the ingredients, it was knowing how much of each to get it to work right, and just kind of like how we got to where we are today with it.
It is an awesome propellant, though.
It's technology always amazes me, but it's just these things that. I mean, that seems like just a really amazing thing to figure out a very, very long time ago.
Mm-hmm. And a lot longer ago than this gun even existed.
Yeah. Changed the world.
A lot longer ago than this gun existed. Hundreds of years.
We should do a black powder podcast.
I was thinking
that would
about
be interesting.
I was thinking about ordering up a couple of more pounds of 3F right now because I have a oldish black powder. And
I got that Hawken out there that we never do anything with.
Sure.
What were you going to say, Jim? I had one thing.
Who was Charleville?
I don't know. Honestly.
Was he like the French JMB?
That could be. I'd have to look into that. But I don't know who Charleville was.
It's a good question.
Good name. Strong name.
Who's Brown Bess?
I couldn't tell you. But
do you know?
I don't.
Sounds like a horse that you'd bet on.
Could be.
Yeah.
Not that I'm.
Sounds like something you get in trouble for calling somebody these days.
Horse betting person. We as far as rate of fire. In my readings again, Ryan. Which this is one thing. I guess having shot even a modern muzzleloader, I was like, that's either impressive or maybe exaggerating. But I mean, I'm sure. It's probably accurate. They were saying 3 rounds per minute.
Yep.
And I'm like,
how many?
I know how long it takes to, I'd say particularly like a reload after you fire at a deer or something like that. I mean, you darn train wreck, you know.
this is where those paper cartridges were extraordinarily handy. If you had the time to manufacture them prior to that conflict.
Right.
Right. So at least at that, you had a self-contained unit. We'll call it a cartridge, right? Because it is.
Right.
It was, your powder was volumetrically measured out. You knew that, okay, if you were going to use paper of X dimension, your ball took up this much. The cordage that secured the ball within the paper made the available column here, and then the end was twisted or tied to this much, right? So you filled that powder up. You had a whole bunch of those in there. You fire your weapon. You bring the gun down. You grab a cartridge. You rip the end. You pour the powder. You prime the gun. You run the whole thing down. 3 a minute is pretty damn impressive, right?
Yeah.
If you didn't have that, and you're lucky enough to be like feeding from a powder flask that has a measuring device on it, that's cool. If not, you're going straight from the horn.
Just giving her.
Yep. And then what does your wadding situation look like?
That seems about right.
Yeah. What does your wadding situation look like? And that's probably the longest part of the process. So like if you had to cut wadding from a strip,
right,
and you'd see these strips tied around the belt, it looked like a sash or a belt or a scarf or something like this. You'd take that gun, once you'd have it powdered, you'd throw that up over the top, you'd put that ball in there, you'd get it started, and then you'd take a special knife, a patch knife,
right,
and you'd cut it off, and then you'd ram it down. That's a lot of hands going on in order to get that thing spun up. I have to imagine that a lot of these suckers just got a ball drop down the barrel, and then you just pulled the trigger and hope that you had enough back pressure to get it going forward. Right? Under the duress and the time like that. Also, that's where that bayonet came in really handy.
Right. I was just about to say
that's the other thing, though. With
thing.
A bayonet on the end, I imagine they're probably sharp. And now you got that big knife out there, and you're trying to mess around with the ramrod and put the stuff on the thing.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how many times guys are accidentally slicing their paws open just trying to move quick.
You may dismount your bayonet to reload. I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess
question.
I wasn't there, but it would be tough trying to move so quick with a four-handed operation with a knife hanging out right next door.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the sights a little bit more.
Sure.
So we talked about that, rear part of the hammer not being a peep.
Yep.
But it also doesn't have a rear sight.
Nope.
She's flat in the back.
Flat in the back. Little indicator up front. Just a simple blade. If you're looking at it there, I don't know which cameras are which, but if you're looking at it, there's just a simple blade there. So not much of a sight reference, but at least something to get you somewhat square.
A bead.
Yep.
You have at least you have a very long sight plane.
That's true. Yeah, and I mean, for what they are, smoothbore gun, big giant round ball of lead. You keep, 3 on a man-sized torso at 50 yards. It ain't bad.
I wouldn't want to get hit by one.
It's crazy to think about that. They fought closer than that. That's wild.
Yeah,
that is wild.
Just having hundreds, thousands of guns pointed at you, 40, 50 yards away, just straight at you. You don't know if you're going to take one or keep fighting for the next volley. What a time to be alive.
Yep.
Well, and then, I think eventually we didn't always fight in that manner.
No.
Well, no, because at some point it's all going to go to
sabers
SHIT
and bayonets at that point.
Well, that, and I think weren't other, methods of like guerrilla warfare essentially.
Sure.
I think this
is where you saw a lot of those long rifles of the era come into effect. Those smaller caliber, higher accuracy guns.
Mm-hmm.
This is where maybe modern sniping found its roots. Was from that era in time. Another thing too, I mentioned grape shot. I didn't mention swan shot or bird shot earlier, but shot in general, not uncommon to be used in these too. So while you would have had a single ball flying out there, you could also fill that thing up with grape, swan, or bird shot and fire a volley of angry lead bees.
Yeesh.
Certainly more effective at close range.
Right.
But another advantage of the smoothbore, and what a horrific tool at that.
That's cool,
and
man.
They still made them pretty.
Yeah.
So
I've seen, more than one actual period correct gun.
Mm-hmm.
And the wood to metal fit is not as outstanding as this. But
I mean, just like they didn't have to do some of this.
Sure. Yeah.
Some of this detail.
And
I don't know how much of that is just the one that we have, the recreation area, and how much of it, they could have just done the AK-47 round, just put a big slab of metal here.
And a lot of them were that, in historical firearms, we'll just say pre-1870. And you go back into that and you look at them and we've got the bands up here that are holding the barrel of the stock, and these are obviously machined and well done. A lot of those are just hammered iron or brass bands.
Yeah.
So they get them on and they just pound them into place, and then you look at them, you're like, oh, that's very obviously hand hammered metal.
Sure.
The Industrial Revolution was a hell of a thing. Once we figured out how to make mass producible parts and things like that. But, a lot of this on a period correct one, like the sling swivels, you look at this and you're like, okay, very evidently manufactured. This would have been a hammered component at that point. And there was a lot of brass that was used at that point as well as steel and other things like that would have made a period example a bit more crude. But nonetheless, this is an extraordinarily accurate representation of what that gun would have been. And
really,
super cool.
Really cool.
Yeah.
Dark when you think about it, but also very cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's fun to talk about. It's wild to talk about. It's heavy to think about. And also, I'm very thankful for this thing and what it afforded the folks who were able to use it and sacrifice. And it's just amazing, and that it was instrumental in the America that we see today and
the world we
live in
have
now.
Today.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have nothing else to add to that.
We should shoot this sometime. I don't have any 68 or 69 caliber balls, but that could be easily remedied.
Find some tin soldiers, melt them down. Lead soldiers, I should say. Sorry.
I've got plenty of black powder. We have at least a flint.
And we know it works.
Yes.
Bingo. All right.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Happy Independence Day today, and darn it, every day if you're listening to this on a day beyond or a different day. But hopefully you enjoyed this podcast. Take care. We'll catch you on the next one.
See ya.